Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also donate to support this work. This work can't go on without your support, so if you can, become a paid subscriber, or the other option is to donate to this work through Cash App. Either way, you'll be helping us to bring this kind of content to you on a more regular basis and a more sure footing. If you find this valuable, you can also like and share Cutting Through with your friends and contacts. That helps as well. So today I want to talk about Zohran Mamdani. Now, those of you who may follow me on social media know very well that I was very excited about Zohran's victory in the Democratic primary for the race to be mayor of my hometown, New York City. And I'm unabashed in that delight. Not only do I think it's important for the issues that I work on, which are Israel, Palestine, and the fight against the misuse of anti-Semitism and accusations of anti-Semitism to defend Israeli crimes. But in my view, Zohran was the best candidate for New York. He brings a fresh and direct perspective. He has very good ideas that are very progressive, but also that are very well thought out. You know, he's not somebody who just says we should do this. And then when you ask him how are you going to pay for it, he just says, well, that throws off some nonsensical, politically impossible thing. He has actual plans to make things work. You can like or dislike those goals and those plans, but he has them. He is a very sharp guy. I thought Brad Lander was a good candidate too, but I do think Zohran, for many reasons, one of them his youth and his charisma, frankly, was a better person for this race. So I was very, very happy with it. And you know, it certainly represents an important marker. You know, New York, obviously, such a big city, the very definition of the big city. And we have somebody who identifies unabashedly as a democratic socialist, which, you know, is a phrase that most people, including people who in some cases support the term and the idea, don't necessarily understand. But and I'm not going to get into that whole definition now, but it is it's a political ideology, but the name of it is one that can trigger people. And so it's something to overcome. It can be overcome. We've seen others overcome it: AOC, Bernie Sanders, and now Zohran Mamdani. So in that sense, it's a promising development. Um, but I want to pump the brakes just a little bit, because as big a victory as this was, and it was, um, you know, there is a danger of a certain amount of complacency when it comes to this kind of race. The race for the mayor of New York tends to go for Democrats, although, you know, that's not set in stone. Mike Bloomberg was a, you know, Republicanish. He had been a Republican. He sort of became a Democrat. Then an independent, and you know, he had to sort of play with that. Bloomberg did recognize that being a Republican wasn't necessarily a winner in New York City, but I think most people looked at him and you know, thought, you know, whatever sort of moderate Republican, you know, never Trumper kind of Republican. And certainly we've seen New York elect one of the most far right, insane fascists of a Republican in Rudy Giuliani. So it's not the kiss of death to be a Republican and running for mayor of New York, but on the whole, you want to be a Democrat. Most, you know, Democrats outnumber Republicans by something like 3-1 in New York. Even independents lean much more heavily towards Democrats than they do towards Republicans in New York. And I keep adding in New York because I think this is really important. Too many people I'm seeing now are talking about Zoran's campaign being a blueprint for how you do this across the country. And in some ways, it is. In some ways, that is not wrong. But let's not make out like New York City is the United States and that New York City Democrats are American Democrats. This is not the case. And I think we need to be mindful of this. We need to not just get into a future where progressives argue, but Zoran did this in New York. Because just because he did this in New York doesn't mean you can do this in Chicago. It doesn't mean you can do this in St. Louis. It doesn't mean you can do this in Pittsburgh. It doesn't mean you can do this in Los Angeles. These are all different places with different ideas, and I think we also, as progressives, need to think about the fact that one of the places Zoran did not do very well is in the African American community in New York, and I think we need to ask ourselves why. And I think we need to think about the fact that mainstream Democrats still have a very, very strong foothold among African American voters, and you look at sort of the icon of that right now, Jim Clyburn. He is as much a part of the party machine as anyone. He is, in my view, as much a part of the problem as anyone in the party. But this is where African American voters are going, and I do think there are a multitude of reasons, as with any large community, and I think there are multitude of approaches that we need to take to address it. But I think progressives have not done well with the African American community. I think there's again number of reasons. I think well, again, that could be a whole video for itself, and I should not allow myself to be derailed there. But it's just it's a certain it is a certain indicator that that we need to look at, because in Democratic races across the country, that's going to matter. And in an even greater way. It was a challenge in this one. If that had not been the case, Zoran's victory would have been overwhelming. So we can I think that's one place that we need to think about. We also need to think about the fact that Zoran won, and it's great that he won, but his main opponent, outside of the progressives, you had the progressive New Yorkers who, in some measure, were going to be split between Zoran and Brad Lander, who was also a really good candidate. Again, I think had New York gone with Brad Lander, that's not bad. They were going to be split in some way between those two, and they were taking on an absolutely horrendous candidate. We're talking about a man who, as governor in New York, and Andrew Cuomo, who resigned in disgrace. And it's not just it's not only the horrific allegations of sexual harassment, where I can't imagine. I guess obviously, given that he got something like 35% of the vote, or he there must have been women that voted for him. I can't imagine how you do that. But that's given the seriousness. He may not have been Harvey Weinstein, but it does seem like he's a man who gets off on degrading women. So that's a little, that's certainly a big handicap. But he also ripped off the state. He was a fraudster. Let's call it what it was. He was a fraudster. Okay, he wasn't quite the fraudster that George Santos was. Boy, these guys come out of New York like crazy. But his tenure was just disaster. He was as dishonorable and disreputable and dishonest a man as you can find in office, and yet, people did vote for him. But we can't ignore that as a factor in Zoran's victory. That is certainly a part of it. And, apparently, and for the moment, his opposition doesn't seem to have taken that lesson to heart, because it does seem like right now, and this is very much right now, this can change very quickly. But right now, they seem to be putting their eggs in the Eric Adams basket, who is a man who, I mean, a Democrat who I mean, he's left the party, but he was a Democrat who literally genuflected to Donald Trump, and literally did favors for Trump so that Trump would intervene in his corruption case. I mean, how does this man stand a chance in an election? And I think in the end he doesn't, because we've seen that Mamdani is not going to shy away from bringing that up in his campaigns. So um, now I would not be at all surprised. In fact, I'd be surprised if it doesn't happen that the opposition tries to come up with somebody who um, who is a better candidate than Adams, because I think Adams is a terrible candidate. Um, and I think we may find that it's the Democrats that are going to be hunting for that alternative, not the Republicans. And I think that what we'll find is that it's not a Republican who they're going to try to put out there. It's going to be an independent, but an independent who is somehow connected to, at least in some way, to the Democratic Party. So, I, I mean, certainly if I was them, that's what I would do. Because counting on Adams to defeat Zoran seems like a very, very bad strategy at this point. But I think it's important for us thinking in the bigger picture and thinking beyond just the election of mayor of New York, especially those of us who are not in New York City, like myself, and I'm sure most of the people listening to this. Um, we need to think about the bigger picture in the longer term, because Zohran Mamdani is going to face attacks from both Republicans and Democrats. He already is. I mean, we've seen it. It's been, it's been ugly. Uh, and the racism is just oozing out of it. But it's not only, but right now, I think it doesn't look strategic. And I think that there's going to be more strategic attacks on him, because he, in the end, like, these people are cynical, they're dishonest. Yes, I know they're politicians by definition. So um, they are trying to protect the status quo more than anything else, especially the Democrats. They are as status quo oriented as you get. So even when they're talking about the Zoran's stance on Israel and Palestine, saying that he's going to make life dangerous for Jews in New York, they don't mean it. They know it's not true. It's not the point. They don't care about that. If he was doing that, they wouldn't care about that either if he served their interests. Just look at who is currently in the White House, and the people who are around him. They don't care about Jewish safety. What they care about is maintaining a system that works very well for them. And Zoran is a threat to that, like AOC, like Bernie Sanders. There's a small handful of people who are in office already, and could be, running for office now or soon, who do threaten that status quo, who are more idealistic, who do see that it's possible to have a more decent country than the one we live in. And that's why they will be converging in some way, not overtly, and I think maybe even not covertly, just operating on cooperative tracks. And speaking here of Republicans and Democrats in New York, to make sure, if they can, that Zoran doesn't win. But it's not just so that he doesn't win. It's so that there is no trend that starts that more people with his sort of policy outlook cannot take office. That's the real threat they see, not any of the stuff you're going to hear. Now, what I think we're going to see going forward, I think we're going to see Republicans continue to sound crazy. And I think we're going to see Republicans continue to talk about all these horrible, crazy things that Zohran Mamdani is going to do when he gets into office, and throwing anti-Semitism out like, every 2 seconds, just ridiculous and unfounded accusations of anti-Semitism, because they know it sticks. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But we're also going to get just basic Islamophobia, and even attacks on Zoran as a naturalized American citizen. I mean, we already saw that the lunatic right wing congressman from Tennessee, Andy Ogles, Republican, actually called for the Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate Zohran Mamdani and see if she can find grounds to strip him of his citizenship, and deport him. Um, I mean, that's bold even for a Republican, and it's not going to go anywhere. There's no real mechanism to even for this government at this point anyway to do something like that. 2 years from now, let's see. But for now, they can't do that. But just the fact that that's out there, just the fact that there is a sitting congressman who says things like that, and there's other stuff out there that I'm going to discuss in more depth a little bit. But the fairly typical. They're going to purge the Jews from the city. They're going to institute Sharia law, this and that. I mean, just Islamophobic rhetoric like crazy. I think that's going to be much more the domain of the Republicans. In fact, I think if the Democrats actually have their way, it will be the exclusive domain of the Republicans because the Democrats, I think, will try a very different tactic if they can. The problem for Democrats is that I think they're going to try to stay away from the Islamophobia and the racism. The problem is they are Islamophobic and racist. So it ends up coming out. We saw that just this week with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Again, I'll get into that more in depth in a little bit. But I think that's where we're going to see the Democrats will take more onto the policy thing. Like the city can't afford to give free bus rides, which is one of the proposals that Zohran has to make the buses free, which is a great idea. And it's hardly a unique one. There's a couple of dozen, I think, American cities that already do this, not small towns. I mean, I think St. Louis is one, Richmond, Virginia is another, there's Chapel Hill, North Carolina, I know. This is a doable thing. This is not hard. And it reduces traffic, reduces pollution a bit. It allows people who can't afford cars, but also can't, for whom, and there's many of them in New York, given especially considering the rents, who can't afford subway and bus fare every day. That can add up. 5 days a week if you have to pay for a subway and a bus. I mean, that can really add up. If you are a person who's struggling to get by in a city where the median rent is, I think, what now up to $4,300 a month, the median. Okay, that's what there are as many people paying less than that as there are paying more than that. That's what median means. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, that's insane. I mean, I can't even imagine how people can afford to live unless they are, making seven figures a year in that city. It's the issues of affordability, and so of course Zohran also is proposing a rent freeze. Making there was this great idea in New York City that worked actually quite well called rent control. It worked wonderfully. It only stopped working because landlords lobbied and got regulations changed so that it would eventually expire. But it works. And there are things that will come up and that have to be dealt with like any other policy. But these are good ideas. Again, you can agree or disagree with them, but this is where I think you're going to see Democrats attacking Mamdani. They're going to attack him by saying there's going to be capital flight from the city. There's going to be a flight of wealthy people out of the city, which will, of course, impact taxes and tax revenues and things of that nature. They'll make those arguments. They'll make those arguments for any liberal or progressive policy. So that's nothing new. But I think that's where we're going to see the Democrats try to stay. The problem for them is, as I said, they are in fact racist and Islamophobic. And so even though they may try to stay there, they're going to have a hard time doing it. I want to read to you a statement. Congressman Dan Goldman, not a particularly liberal man, but a Democrat. He made this statement after Zohran Mamdani's victory. Assembly leader Zohran Mamdani ran an energized campaign that elevated the most pressing issues facing our city: affordability and the cost of living. Yesterday, Zohran and I met to discuss those issues that we agree on, as well as other critical ones where we do not. Zohran and I share a desire to lift up vulnerable New Yorkers and make the city more affordable and safe. Actually, Goldman has nothing to do with that process, but okay, we'll move on. To that end, I explained why Jewish New Yorkers feel unsafe in the city, and that as he continues this campaign, he must not only condemn anti-Jewish hate and calls for violence, but make clear that as mayor, he would take proactive steps to protect all New Yorkers and make us secure. That's a contemptible statement. Now, why is it a contemptible statement? I mean, of course, we would want the mayor to make such a pledge, right? Except Mamdani has said it over and over and over and over again. And the implication in Goldman's statement is that he hasn't said it, is that he needs to be convinced of it. He doesn't see the problem at best, or he doesn't want to address the problem at worst. It's misleading. It tells people that things are not what they are. Mamdani has been clear from day one. And, recently I saw him tear up and you can say, hey, crocodile tears, the guy's a good actor, whatever. I don't buy that. I saw a man who was really, really hurt, as many people are, by being called an anti-Semite. That is not an accusation that should be hurled lightly. And it's hurled at this point at almost everything that the Jewish community doesn't like. And that can be criticism of Israel, or it could just be a policy debate. Whatever it is, it's just, as soon as you're a Jewish leader, Jewish organization, and you don't like what the other side is saying, you say anti-Semitism. It's despicable. First of all, and speaking as somebody who has faced physical violence for being Jewish, okay, on more than one occasion, I'll add. Not to mention, harassment and insulting language, all of those things. Speaking of that, this is not a small issue, and I understand the resonance that anti-Semitism has for Jews and non-Jews alike, given the history that's not that old, less than a century ago, right? We're talking about an unbelievable genocide. Concentration camps and death camps, where more than half the people who were killed in them were Jews. And it amounted to a third of the European Jewish population, a genocide from which, at least in terms of numbers, our community, the European Jewish community, the Ashkenazi Jewish community, if you like, has not yet recovered in terms of numbers. Not only that, it was a trauma. And one of the points I try to make to people very often about why Jews may be sensitive about this, it didn't just happen. What happened in the Holocaust was that the entire world turned its back and closed its doors. We treat as almost a historical footnote the stories of boats of Jewish refugees being turned back to Germany or to Poland from European countries and from the United States, my friends. During the war, these things were being done by governments who knew exactly what was happening in Europe. So, yeah, there is. But does that sound familiar? The world turning its back on a genocide? Does that resonate with anything that's going on today? Because that's what Israel's doing in Gaza, and that's what the world is doing again to the Palestinians in Gaza. Of course, the circumstances are different. It's not a perfect comparison. Nothing is. You can never compare two genocides and find them exactly the same, or even mostly the same. But that aspect, the aspect of the world knowing what's going on and just not caring, that's the same. So when you call someone an anti-Semite, it hurts, because you're telling them that they're part of that genocide, that they're part of that system. And I saw on Zohran Mamdani's face how much that hurt him. And I've seen it on the faces of other friends and colleagues who are not Jewish. Um, Atheists, Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, Muslims, doesn't matter who. I see the pain that that accusation causes, and I see how often it's false. And so does the rest of the world. And eventually, my friends, those of you who are engaging in this behavior are going to regret it. You are crying wolf. And that's very dangerous when we have real anti Semites who are working with the state of Israel. Be it Viktor Orban in Hungary, be it Vladimir Putin in Russia, be it Donald Trump in the United States. Nobody talks about that. Nobody is calling them anti-Semitic. They're calling Zohran Mamdani anti-Semitic, a man who has never failed to condemn anti-Semitism. And I think at some level the Democrats recognize this, even though they're part of the problem. And so I think that's why they're going to try to stay away from that tactic with Zohran. I think if nothing else, they're going to see that it's not working. Republicans won't see that. I think the Democrats will. They will see that it didn't work in the primary, and it's not going to work in the general either. But again, what do we do about the fact that Democrats are, in fact, Islamophobic and racist? Kirsten Gillibrand demonstrated this perfectly. She was on the Brian Lehrer Show, which is a local radio show in New York City. And this nut of a caller who called himself Gabe called in and asked Gillibrand about the, quote, threats facing the Jewish community from Zohran Mamdani. Not from white supremacists, not even from people radicalized over Gaza, who may have been radicalized in a negative direction. I mean, these things can happen and do happen. No, from Zohran Mamdani. Not only did Gillibrand not just do what she should have done, which is stop him right there and say, what threats? Yeah. She allowed him to go on. And he went on and he said, and I'm quoting here, there was a bill I was reading about that unfortunately he wants to target synagogues and Jewish institutions which donate to nonprofits, which are medical institutions like United Hatzalah and Magen David, he said, Magen David, I'm not sure if that's a typo or if that's what he said, but it's Magen David Adom, which is like the Jewish Red Cross. So let me stop there for a second. He's talking about a bill that's in the state legislature, first of all, that has nothing to do with the city, state bill. Though Mamdani did sponsor it when he was in the state legislature. And it's called Not One Dime. And what it says is that New York cannot support the settlements in the West Bank, not Israel, the settlements in the West Bank in any way. Now, the pro-Israel propagandists went to Gabe and didn't say that this is about settlements. They said, well, if they do this, then what they're saying is that we can't give money to Hatzalah and Magen David Adom. So Magen David Adom, like as he said correctly, is the kind of like the Jewish Red Cross. It's a medical emergency service. Hatzalah is an ambulance service, which exists both in the U.S. and in Israel. And they're funded through local communities. In this case, the settlements would be funding them. So you'd be cutting funds, and yes, you'd be cutting funds to them too, because you're cutting funding to the settlements, which shouldn't be there. There should be no reason for Magen David Adom and Hatzalah in the West Bank, because those people should not be living there. They are living there illegally. Nobody brought this up. I mean, I think Blair just, yeah, I mean, can't expect him to know everything. This is a fairly fine detail. I'm sure it got past a lot of people who are more knowledgeable on the subject than him, and also than her, than Gillibrand. Anyway, the caller continued. How do we make sure that Jewish institutions are protected from his plans to punish and fine our institutions, which fundraise the medical nonprofits and which do work both here in the United States and in Israel and other countries in the world? And also, how can we hold Mr. Mamdani accountable for his glorifying association of Hamas and other terror bombings of the Intifada in the 1990s, where over 1,000 Jewish Israelis were killed, to his revisionist Holocaust knowledge, to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising where Jews were mass exterminated and faced threats. He compared when Jews were killed to when Jews fought back against Nazis. It's quite despicable. I'm sorry. Some of that is just incoherent. I'm not even sure what he's referring to in terms of the Holocaust stuff. Somebody wants to let me know, feel free. I imagine it has something to do with a question about resistance and saying how the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, was legitimate resistance. I don't know. I do know that he does not glorify Hamas. He does not associate with Hamas. He has never once said anything positive about Hamas or even intimated it. What this is talking about is some of the phrases that Mamdani has refused to condemn other people using. For example, and this is the one that became the issue in the New York mayoral race, globalize the Intifada. I'm going to get to these issues in a minute, but I want to make sure we address Gillibrand first. The host, actually, Brian Lehrer, actually heard this rant and understood that some of it had to have not been true, but he didn't have the actual facts on hand to refute any of it. So he tried to give Gillibrand an opening to do so. She didn't take it. Instead, here's what Gillibrand said. The caller is exactly the New York constituent that I've spoken to that are alarmed. They're alarmed by past public statements. They are alarmed by past positions, particularly references to global jihad. Now, let's be very, very clear. The caller is a damned racist and an ignoramus who was fed a bunch of pro-Israel propaganda that he does not understand and cannot fact check because he is not versed in the subject. I don't have to meet the man to know that. I hear what he said, and it's clear that he does not know the facts on the ground. This is true of many people who talk about Israel, who defend Israel, some of whom are in the Senate right next to Gillibrand. Looking at you, John Fetterman, and your despicable reveling in the deaths of Palestinians. I don't need to see Gabe. I don't need to meet Gabe to know that Gabe doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Okay. Why do I not need that? Because I've studied this issue for almost 4 decades. I've worked professionally on this issue for almost 3 decades. I have written an award-winning book on this issue. I have written literally thousands of articles on this issue. I have met with government officials in Israel, Palestine, and the United States, certainly over hundreds of times. I have given talks. I have been on TV, all of that kind of crap. Okay. I know what the hell I'm talking about. That doesn't mean I can't be wrong about something. I'm not claiming to be infallible. I am claiming that a schmuck like this has no clue and that I'm experienced enough to tell without having met him. The fact that this is how Gillibrand responded shows who she is. It shows her to be the racist Islamophobe that she is, because she immediately went to this place about global jihad and how Mamdani, basically saying, yes, Mamdani is a threat. I feel you. I hear you. He's bad. He's evil. It's telling that not long after this, Gillibrand's people said she misspoke. I heard the interview. She didn't misspeak nothing. Nothing was misspoken. Nothing was taken out of context. Nothing. This was the exchange. What I've read to you, this was the exchange. And there was no stumbling here. Gillibrand knew exactly what she was saying. This wasn't Joe Biden making a slip. This was Gillibrand expressing her view, her racist, Islamophobic, murderous view. And that's who we have in the United States Senate. And that's who's supposed to be calling themselves a liberal in the United States Senate. Lara broke in and said, on Mamdani, I just feel compelled to say we can find no evidence that he has supported Hamas or supported violent jihad. Can you? I mean, for a guy who clearly wasn't ready to field this question, I thought that was a hell of a move. And this is not, by the way, Lara is a very mainstream guy. He's a very middle of the road kind of guy. But, he said, what are you talking about? Do you have any evidence? Her response, again, very telling. I don't have all the data and information, and I've never sat down with Mr. Mamdani, so I've asked to have that meeting. I mean, and yet you're perfectly comfortable portraying him as a threat to the safety of Jews in New York City. Next to Tel Aviv, there are more Jews in New York City than any other city in the world. Okay, that's not something that you should be taking lightly. This is terrorizing Jewish people. That is what is happening here. She is terrorizing Jewish people. And this is what causes so many Jews to react the way they have to Zohran Mamdani and to any Muslim. This is what causes Jews to see someone with a keffiyeh and feel threatened. This is what causes somebody to hear the word Palestinian or to know that that person standing 20 feet away from them is a Palestinian and to feel threatened, to feel afraid. Yes, it's playing on the racism in that person themselves. It's playing on the Islamophobia in that person themselves, but it's inflaming it to an unbelievable degree and to a dangerous degree, damn it. We can talk about some of the things that have been done that are wrong, that are horrible. The shootings in Washington, D.C. That was just a horrible thing. The attack on the march with Molotov cocktails in Boulder, Colorado. That's violent assault, and that cannot be in any way excused or tolerated, even in the context of Israel's genocide. There's no excuse for that. We can talk about that. But why do we spend so much more time talking about that than talking about the 6-year-old Palestinian boy who was stabbed to death in front of his mother by their landlord because he was Muslim and Palestinian? Why do we not talk about the 3 young students who were shot in the back because they were wearing one of them was wearing a keffiyeh? Why do we not talk about the regular assaults on Muslims and Arabs in the United States, American citizens? But we don't talk about that stuff. Instead, we worry about phraseology. So let's be clear about this. To my knowledge, and I've actually looked for this, so I'm pretty secure in my knowledge. Zohran Mamdani has never remotely hinted at supporting global jihad. What that is actually about is the phrase globalize the intifada, which has been arbitrarily and ignorantly and incorrectly defined by people who don't know what it means to mean kill all the Jews. Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, will tell you that that means kill all the Jews. Anybody from AIPAC will tell you that means kill all the Jews, but these people don't know what they're talking about. Okay. These people have no idea what Palestinian supporters, let alone Palestinians themselves, mean when they say anything. They don't know what they mean when they say hello. They don't see them as people, so why would they? They make this stuff up to suit their propaganda for the moment. Globalize the Intifada is a call for protest and a call for justice and a call for Palestinian freedom. In Palestine and among Palestinians, Intifada can take many forms, much like, by the way, jihad also takes many forms, only some of which have anything to do with violence of any kind. But Intifada was originally the term used for the first popular Palestinian uprising in 1987, first organized Palestinian popular uprising. The overwhelming majority, and I mean with few exceptions, although every exception made the news and the majority of actions didn't, those actions were nonviolent. They were strikes, they were sit-ins, they were protests, demonstrations, marches. That's what that was. In fact, the strikes themselves, at the time, Israel was very dependent on Palestinian labor. And the strikes were so effective. That was when, after that, is when Israel started importing people from the Philippines and Thailand and other places to do the household work and the caretaking and the menial work that they had been relying on Palestinians to do, and the labor that they had been relying on Palestinians to do. It had an effect in that way, although you don't hear about that much. The second Intifada, we all know, was much bloodier. But even that Intifada, as bloody as it was, and it was, still featured a lot of civil disobedience, a lot of protest, a lot of nonviolent action, but you don't hear about that. And one of the reasons, I mean, a lot of the reasons that you don't hear about it are obvious, propaganda and how the media treats explosions versus peaceful protest. But one of the reasons you also don't hear about it is that in both Intifadas, the basic principle that Yitzhak Rabin laid out for how you deal with nonviolent protesters were applied. Break their arms and legs. That's what Rabin said. Israel's response to nonviolent protest, because they knew what a threat it was to confront it violently. The reason for that was twofold. One was to try and, intimidate at least some part of the population from participating in those events, but also because it would provoke a violent response from the Palestinians, which is more what Israel wants. They're better at that. That's their playing field, and it really, really helps with the messaging. So, but to Palestinians, and that ends up how people around the world and in Israel see it. But to Palestinians, the Intifada is simply resistance. It is a call for change. It is a call to resist, and it is a by any means necessary call. But it's not a call for violence, and it is certainly not a call for just wanton killing. It is a call for freedom. It is a call to get their lives back, because generation after generation of Palestinians haven't had those lives. And so, no, Zohran Mamdani does not condemn that. He doesn't say it himself, but he doesn't condemn it. And the reason he doesn't condemn it is because he understands who's fighting for justice and who's fighting for apartheid. And it's the Palestinians fighting for justice and the Israelis fighting for apartheid, if you needed that filled in for you. It's not only about globalize the Intifada. It's also, we've seen this as well with, the river to the sea. You know who says the river to the sea the most? Israelis. Israelis are the ones who have not only said from the river to the sea, they have made from the river to the sea their reality. Israel rules everything from the river to the sea. Netanyahu went to the United Nations a couple of years back with a picture of the area that is Israel for him, and it was just one solid block, all of the West Bank, all of Gaza. It was all Israel, and no one said a word. Can you imagine for a second if Mahmoud Abbas had brought that same picture, what the outrage would have been? Oh, he wants to destroy Israel. He wants to kill all the Jews. Um, from the river to the sea is a call for justice. From the river to the sea is a call for freedom. Different Palestinians have different visions, like any other group of people, about what a free Palestine looks like to them, how they feel they would want to relate to the Israeli Jews who are there. You know, um, that's irrelevant at this point, first of all, because there's nothing like that on the horizon, for one thing. But for another, the bottom line has to be that all people are free. Whether you're a Jewish Israeli, a Palestinian Arab, all people should have the same rights and they should all be free. And then they work out how they live together, like everywhere else in the world. But that is very objectionable to Israel and to Israel's supporters. And and again, because they can't justify these things, because there's no way to make this sound appealing to people outside, people who are not Israeli or Israeli supporters, they throw around anti-Semitism instead. It's anti-Semitic. It's anti-Semitic to call for freedom. It's anti-Semitic to call for justice. It's anti-Semitic to call for equality. It's anti-Semitic to oppose apartheid. It's anti-Semitic to oppose genocide. This is what Israel's telling you. And it's what they're saying about Zohran Mamdani. So Zohran Mamdani supports BDS, boycott, divestments, and sanctions. You don't have to support BDS. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. What's wrong with it? People make this argument, it delegitimizes Israel. How? How? In fact, it actually, in a certain sense, it legitimizes Israel, because when you deal with whether it's a huge corporation or a powerful government, this kind of economic action is exactly what people who want to see a policy change do. They boycott, they divest, and if they can get their governments to go along, they push for sanctions to try and get this government to change its policies. It's a perfectly normal civil society response, which nobody complains about, and by the way, which Israel uses constantly for trivial reasons against other countries and against their own citizens in some cases. It's not. I'm old enough to remember when Avigdor Lieberman, head of the Yisrael Beitenu party, caused a big stir outside of Israel. In Israel, it was considered perfectly normal, even for people who disagreed with it. But he caused a big stir by calling for a boycott of Arab businesses within Israel. This was Israeli citizens he was boycotting. Nobody called that anti-anything. But theoretically, it would obviously be anti-Semitic because you're boycotting Israelis. Huh? I mean, these things fall apart with the barest scrutiny, and that's why they're not subjected to scrutiny by people who support Israel, because there is no logic to them. There is no ethical basis to them. There is only, I want what I want. I want my concept of a Jewish state, which is a state for Jews only, which ironically is actually not the state that we know Judea and Israel to be back in the biblical days. If you actually read the book of Ruth to see how that was working out then. So again, BDS is considered anti-Semitic, and so that's what they throw at Zohran. It's just not true. But the difference is that when other politicians have that thrown in their face, thinking of somebody like Maxwell Frost, who was a big supporter of BDS as he was rising up in local politics. But when he decided to run for Congress, backed way off of it. Still supports Palestinian rights. He's still one of, I mean, and this says something about the state of Congress, but he's still one of actually the best on this issue in Congress. But he backed off of the BDS train very quickly when he wanted to run for Congress. Zohran Mamdani, who is running for the mayor of frickin' New York, did not back off and does not back off. So, and I think there's a lot of people out there who aren't really invested in Israel and Palestine. Don't maybe, if you ask them, wouldn't know who was right or wrong, but see that as being politically courageous and the right. They should see it that way. That's exactly what it is. So, to sort of wrap this up, I do think the Democrats will be staying away from too much of the anti-Semitism as far as they can. I think, as Gillibrand, I think just demonstrated, it's going to be very difficult for people who are Islamophobic and racist, like Chuck Schumer, like Hakeem Jeffries, like so many of the leading Democrats in both the House and the Senate, and just in the party machinery in general. So much of the centrist or right-wing Democrats, people are like Dan Goldman and are like Kirsten Gillibrand, who, when they think they're speaking in balanced language, are actually incredibly racist. But I think they're going to try to stay away from that and leave that to the Republicans, and they're going to focus on red baiting. They're going to focus on Zoran's quote unquote socialism. Democratic socialism is a very particular brand of socialism, which has nothing whatsoever in common with the Soviet Union or China. But I'm sure they are going to try and make it out as if it does. They are going to caricature those sorts of policies. I think that will be, and I think they'll also try to hit him on the ideas, on the basic, usual conservative arguments that if you enact his policies, capital and wealthy people will fly away from New York. Didn't work in the primary. Might it work better in the general? We will see. But I think those are the things that progressives who want to support Zohran Mamdani should be prepared for, because if he does win in November, and I think he will at this point, especially if the Democrats and Republicans can't find a better candidate than Eric Adams to go up against him, that is just an enormous step forward. Enormous. We saw something like this a few years ago with, I think her name was India Walton in Buffalo. And the Democrats absolutely torpedoed her after she won the Democratic primary. She was also a Democratic Socialist. And after she won the Democratic primary, the Democrats absolutely torpedoed her in the general. I think it's going to be harder to do that this time around. And it's certainly going to be next to impossible if they have to try to get Eric Adams back into office. But it's certainly not impossible. And I think if we're not ready to support Zohran, both from within the city and from outside, there's a good likelihood that it can happen. And the reason it's important for those of us who don't live in New York, for those of us who do, look, the mayor of New York has nothing to do with Israel and Palestine. Okay, nothing. I mean, his views on this issue really don't matter. Until he becomes a national candidate or elected official, be it in Congress or anywhere else, his views on this issue do not matter. But the question of being able to use Jewish fear and the bogus accusations of anti-Semitism, and most of all, the horrific distortion of Palestinian language, lives, and views, in order to promote what is essentially a right-wing agenda that's just a different right-wing agenda from the one the guy in the White House is pursuing. That's what we as progressives have to be very, very concerned about. And that's what Zohran Mamdani's potential victory in November really means and really stands for. So please do like and subscribe. Please share this with your friends. If you can support the work of Cutting Through, please do so. mitchellputnick.substack.com. And I will be talking to you again soon.